A simple woman outsmarts an arrogant CEO in a job interview. What she reveals shocks everyone. It was a busy Monday morning at Halverson Global Headquarters in California. Miriam, a kind-hearted lady, stepped in quietly. Her steps made no sound. She didn't need them to. Clutching a weathered leather folder to her chest, she scanned the room with composed eyes. There were others, half a dozen candidates, dressed like they had come straight from a fashion spread. Tailored suits, polished shoes, glossy portfolios. Their laughter rang a little too loud, their confidence a little too rehearsed. One man gave her a cursory glance before returning to his own reflection in a glass panel. She wasn't from their world. That much was clear. Before we move further, please ensure to like, share, and subscribe for heartwarming stories like this. Miriam's blazer was modest, her heels barely lifted her above the crowd, and her dark hair was pulled into a practical bun. But her presence had a quiet gravity. She didn't fidget. She didn't scroll on her phone. She simply waited, still and observant, as though she saw something everyone else had missed. From behind the marble counter, the receptionist glanced at her name on the clipboard. Miriam Lane, she said with practiced neutrality, then leaned slightly to whisper to her colleague, not low enough to escape notice. She doesn't stand a chance. Miriam heard. She always did. But her expression didn't change. She took the visitor badge with a soft thank you and moved to the waiting area, choosing a seat near the window where the city buzzed far below. Her hands rested gently on the folder, thumbs brushing the leather edges as if feeling for memory. She didn't glance at the others, though she felt their eyes on her. "I think she's lost," one woman muttered just loud enough to be overheard. Another chuckled. Miriam didn't react. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. Instead, she watched them. How they compared resumes, recited buzzwords, laughed at half-finished jokes about venture capital and corporate takeovers. All of it was noise. Surface-level power play. No one noticed how often they spoke over one another, how their smiles tightened when they thought no one was watching. She noticed everything. Outside, clouds rolled in, casting faint shadows on the lobby floor. One by one, names were called, and each candidate disappeared through the heavy double doors. Each time, the laughter in the room dimmed a little. Some returned moments later, stiff and silent, gathering their things with downcast eyes. Others didn't return at all. Still, Miriam waited. Her phone buzzed once in her bag. She didn't check it. Her focus was here, on this moment, on the rhythm of a place that prided itself on polish and intimidation. She could feel the energy shifting now, the tension building as fewer candidates remained. The receptionist glanced up, surprised to see her still sitting there so calmly. And still, Miriam didn't blink. She wasn't here to impress. She was here to finish something that had begun long before this interview was ever scheduled. Long before Halverson Global ever knew her name. When the door opened once more and a voice called, "Mississippi Miriam Lane," she stood with quiet precision. Not rushed, not hesitant, just ready. And as she crossed the lobby, not a single person realized what was coming. Not yet. One candidate had walked in with a swagger and left pale and quiet, barely mumbling a goodbye. Another had laughed too loudly on his way in, but returned minutes later, eyes downcast, coat clutched like armor. The silence they left behind grew more suffocating with each passing moment. Jordan Halverson was inside, CEO, legend, and corporate predator. His reputation for slicing through ego was no myth. He didn't interview. He dismantled. Miriam sat on the far end of the room, unnoticed again, as if her presence defied the radar of people too absorbed in themselves. The designer suits huddled closer, lowering voices just enough to make their laughter carry. "Who brings a charity folder to a billion-dollar interview?" Someone whispered. "Maybe she's just here for the snacks," another murmured. The joke wasn't funny, but it passed around like a toast. Miriam heard it all. She always did. Her expression remained still, untouched by mockery. Not amused. Not wounded. Just still. She placed the folder in her lap, slowly opened it, and began reviewing her notes. Not nervously, there was no tremble in her fingers, no fidgeting. It was mechanical. Intentional. Each section marked with tabs, key figures underlined, and a timeline only she understood. The laughter faded. The room didn't. A wall clock ticked mercilessly. The next name was called. A woman in a crimson blazer stood, took a deep breath, and walked out. The door closed behind her like the lid of a coffin. Silence returned. Miriam adjusted her seat slightly, her eyes scanning the pages in front of her once more. She wasn't looking for reassurance. She was sharpening her memory, aligning her thoughts, recalling every line of code, every sleepless night that led her to this chair. Her phone buzzed in her bag. She reached in, glanced at the screen. "You sure you want this job?" The sender didn't matter. The question wasn't new. She locked the screen without replying and returned her attention to the notes. The answer lived in the way she exhaled, measured, steady. Not yes. Not no. Just forward. Another candidate rose suddenly. "This is a joke," he muttered, gathering his things and heading for the exit without waiting to be called. He didn't look back. No one stopped him. One seat less. A receptionist poked her head in, glancing quickly around. "Still waiting on Miriam Lane?" "I'm here," she said softly, not needing to raise her voice. The receptionist blinked, nodded, and disappeared again. Those who remained now glanced at Miriam for the first time with something different in their expressions. Not respect. Not yet. But less certainty. Less amusement. She didn't meet their eyes. She didn't need to. Her fingers slid across the edge of a graph in her folder, pausing as if tracing memory. The hallway beyond the waiting room door remained quiet. No one had returned from inside for a while now. And yet Miriam sat calmly. She was not waiting for her turn. She was preparing for something else, something none of them saw coming. The door handle moved. Another moment passed, and everything inside her stilled, not from fear, but from readiness. The double doors swung open with a hush, and Miriam stepped inside. The boardroom was vast, intimidating not by design, but by the people it contained. A long table stretched ahead, ringed by stern faces and tailored suits. At the head sat Jordan Halverson, the man whose name echoed across headlines and corporate exposés alike. The room felt colder in his presence. He didn't stand. He didn't smile. He glanced at her once, as though scanning a file he'd already discarded. "Miss Miriam, right?" he drawled. "Let's make this quick." A few executives exchanged smirks, already bracing for entertainment. Miriam took the lone seat at the opposite end, placing her folder in front of her with quiet precision. Her expression remained unreadable, though the pressure in the room thickened. She faced it with a kind of internal calm, not the absence of fear, but its mastery. The questions began. Her resume was dissected like a flawed blueprint. A finance director asked, "You took 2 years off. Why?" "I had freelance projects." "Independent work," she replied. "Unverified," someone murmured. "Documented," she returned without flinching. They moved to her employment gaps, her lack of Ivy League credentials, even her choice of attire. One board member coughed pointedly, eyes flicking to her simple jacket as though it violated the dress code of power. Jordan leaned back, arms crossed. "We like sharp people here, Mississippi Lane. You seem soft." It wasn't just a jab. It was a test. A provocation meant to spark discomfort, to invite retreat. Miriam didn't blink. "I believe sharpness is best measured by results," she said. "Not by volume." A light laugh rippled from a corner of the room. "Not kind. More a cue for others to join." They did. Miriam waited. She didn't defend her answer, didn't explain herself. She let the silence after their laughter stretch a little longer than was comfortable. It wasn't arrogance, it was strategy. Jordan narrowed his eyes. "What exactly do you think you can offer a company like Halverson Global?" Her gaze met his. "That depends on what Halverson Global is still capable of recognizing." The laughter died quicker this time. No one spoke, but several pens stopped moving. She opened her folder without fanfare and slid one document forward across the polished wood. Not to Jordan. Just close enough for any of them to reach. "This is a summary of what I've built. A model I designed and tested independently. It aligns with a product you recently acquired." Jordan didn't touch it. Instead, he tapped a pen against the table and said, "We're not here to be impressed by unverified claims." "Then feel free to verify it," she replied calmly. "It speaks for itself." Another silence. This one tighter, more uncertain. Miriam didn't feel it. She sat with the ease of someone who had already faced greater pressure and walked through it. The boardroom, once so eager to devour, now seemed unsure where to bite. Jordan leaned forward slightly, expression unreadable. A flicker of something passed through his eyes, not yet respect, but no longer dismissal. And then, as the room hovered between curiosity and challenge, a voice from the far end finally broke the silence. "Let's look at that model." Miriam nodded once, and waited. For a moment, no one breathed. Jordan Halverson had leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes sharp with expectation. His voice, smooth but edged, sliced through the thick air of the boardroom. "What makes you think you can lead a team at my company?" It was the final blow. He delivered it like a man certain of a knockout. Miriam didn't flinch. Her eyes locked onto his, unwavering and calm. Her voice, though quiet, didn't need volume to command the room. Because I built the core technology that your company just raised $50 million on. The silence was immediate and stunning. A few heads turned sharply. Someone exhaled too loudly. A whisper flickered on the far end of the table, then died before it formed into words. Jordan froze, caught off guard. Not by the answer, but by the certainty with which it had been delivered. Miriam reached into her folder and slid out a small stack of neatly bound documents. She placed them gently on the table in front of her and pushed them forward, her movements deliberate, her face unreadable. Design drafts, email correspondences, prototype timelines, source code snapshots with my metadata. She spoke each item aloud like a verdict being read. The startup you acquired 6 months ago built its pitch on my system. The model they sold you? It's mine. Down to the architecture. Disbelief rippled across the table. A woman in a navy blazer leaned forward first, eyes scanning the top page. A man beside her reached for the next. Pages began passing, hands growing more hurried, eyes more alert. Jordan hadn't moved. His confident posture had shifted slightly. Not enough for most to notice, but Miriam saw it. The subtle tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers tapped once against his armrest and then stilled. You're saying, he said finally, carefully, that you developed this technology independently? No, Miriam corrected softly. I'm saying I developed it first. Another pause. I was contracted by a firm 3 years ago to design a scalable predictive algorithm for decentralized data mapping. They dropped the project. I kept building. Then your new acquisition used that exact framework and rebranded it as theirs. A rustle of pages filled the room like the whisper of a coming storm. A younger executive looked up, brow furrowed. She's right. The architecture diagrams match. Even the debugging tags. Miriam stayed silent. She had no need to defend the truth. Jordan's stare hardened. But it wasn't anger. Not yet. It was realization, slowing, spreading, rooting itself in discomfort. You have proof this wasn't stolen? He asked. I have timestamps. Emails. Patent drafts. Some dated 2 years before your deal was signed. No boasting. No theatrics. Just facts. The boardroom, once so eager to laugh, now felt like a library holding its breath. No one smiled. No one spoke. Every sound was measured, every thought recalibrating. Jordan leaned back now, slower than before. The confidence in the room had shifted, and everyone knew it. Not a single eye was on her clothes anymore. They were on the storm she had just let in. And she wasn't finished. One board member reached for a tablet with trembling fingers, scrolling rapidly. Another opened a laptop, typing furiously. The neat lines of corporate order began to dissolve. Whatever certainty had held this room together was now fracturing. Miriam stood at the center of it all, still seated, still composed. Her hands remained folded on the table, as if the chaos around her were none of her doing. You may have bought the product, she said clearly, but not the mind behind it. A few heads turned sharply. Someone scoffed in disbelief, but even that was hollow. I still own the intellectual property, she continued. The algorithm, the sequence logic, even the error-correcting structure, it's all mine. Filed under my name, in a provisional patent application, last week. The last 2 words landed like a dropped hammer. Silence fractured into murmurs. No way, someone muttered under their breath. Is she bluffing? Another asked, but not confidently. The legal advisor, gray-suited and grim-faced, stood abruptly, grabbing a phone from his jacket pocket. He stepped out without a word, leaving the door swinging slightly in his wake. Jordan Halverson looked as though the oxygen had been siphoned from the room. Gone was the relaxed arrogance from earlier. His posture stiffened, his fingers clenching lightly against the armrest. Miriam's gaze didn't waver. She wasn't angry. She wasn't vindictive. She was simply done being invisible. I was contracted by one of your former partner firms, she explained. Small, underfunded, barely operational. I built the prototype in phases, over months, during off hours, in borrowed spaces. The project was shelved. The company folded. But I didn't stop working. Her voice was steady, but not cold. If anything, it carried the quiet echo of endurance. They had no interest in the system beyond a concept deck. So I kept building it. Alone. One executive leaned in toward the documents she had brought, flipping pages now with urgency rather than doubt. Another tapped notes into a phone, eyes narrowed, forehead creased. Jordan finally spoke, though the edge in his voice had dulled. Why come here? Why now? She looked at him for a long moment. Because you built your latest investor pitch around my work, she said. And I thought you should finally meet the person you owe it to. The weight of that truth settled heavily in the space between them. No one interrupted. Even the ones who'd mocked her earlier now seemed unsure of their own place at the table. She had shifted something fundamental, not just the balance of power, but the room's perception of her entirely. Miriam looked around, letting the silence linger. She was no longer being evaluated. They were. And slowly, one by one, they realized it. There was no apology in her eyes. No apology was owed. She had come not to request an opportunity, but to reclaim her name. Her presence, once overlooked, now anchored the room. And the ones who had dismissed her minutes ago sat with hands still, mouths closed, unsure of what to say next. Some truths don't require shouting. They just need to be undeniable. And in that room, at that moment, Miriam Lane had made herself unforgettable. The room was trying to breathe again. After the storm of revelations, the whispers had died, the chaos stilled. Papers lay scattered, screens dimmed, and voices that once roared had turned inward, reflecting, recalibrating. Jordan Halverson straightened in his chair, adjusting his cufflinks as though that might restore his control. His voice, when it returned, carried an attempt at calm that didn't quite mask its edge. "We can negotiate," he said, forcing a measured tone. "Name your salary." It was a lifeline dressed as power. A familiar move from a man used to tying solutions with dollar signs. Miriam didn't flinch. Her head tilted slightly, her gaze cool but not unkind. "I'm not here for a salary," she said softly. "I'm here to see if this company deserves my leadership." A second silence, quieter than the last, but far heavier. The words hung suspended, bold in their clarity. The simplicity made them louder than a shout. Jordan's jaw tensed. Somewhere down the table, a pin clicked once, then fell silent. The board members, so confident earlier in their rituals of scrutiny, now sat still, their expressions unreadable. Miriam turned, not to Jordan, but to the board itself. "My terms are simple," she said. "I want equity. I want control over the technology one created. And I want a team that listens, not just hears, but understands. Innovation dies in silence. I won't lead from beneath." One board member, a woman who hadn't spoken all day, gave a slight nod. Another, further down, folded his hands slowly as if acknowledging her stance with unspoken respect. They were seeing her now, not as a wild card, not as a surprise, but as a force. Jordan's composure had not recovered. His fingers tapped once, halted, then clenched into his palm. For a man so skilled at steering rooms, he was suddenly out of angles. Miriam wasn't boasting. She wasn't daring them. She was offering a mirror and asking them if they liked what stared back. "I built something valuable," she continued. "Not just for profit, but for purpose. What you do with it next depends on the kind of company you choose to be." The message was clear. She could walk away. And if she did, they wouldn't just lose talent, they'd lose credibility, integrity, the story behind their own success. She waited, not out of arrogance, but patience, like someone who had already made her decision and was simply watching others catch up. And slowly, the weight of her words began to land. She didn't need this room, but the room perhaps needed her. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It brimmed with the unmistakable shift of power. Something unspoken had turned, not with noise, but with conviction. Miriam remained seated, still composed, her eyes steady. Jordan had no words. And for the first time since she'd entered the building, the simple woman who had once been dismissed by whispers and sideways glances now held the room without saying another thing. And everyone knew it. The press release was brief, formal in tone, precise in wording, yet impossible to ignore. Miriam Lane appointed Chief Technology Officer, effective immediately. Jordan Halverson to transition into advisory role. Company shares reflect record-breaking investor confidence. The headlines followed. News outlets buzzed, analysts speculated. But inside Halverson Global, there was no spectacle, just the quiet hum of a new era beginning. Weeks had passed since the boardroom confrontation. The storm had come and gone, but its presence lingered like a shift in the air, unseen, undeniable. On the 38th floor, Miriam stood at the threshold of her new office. It was spacious, but not extravagant. The walls were clean. The view stretched across the city, glowing gold under the early morning sun. It was the kind of office people spent careers chasing. But Miriam didn't pause to admire it. She walked in with the same calm that had carried her through everything before. On the desk sat her familiar leather folder, edges worn smooth by time. Beside it, a sleek company-issued laptop blinked to life. The contrast between them was stark. Old and new, grit and polish, but neither overshadowed the other. They simply belonged. She placed her bag down and slid into the chair, fingers brushing the cover of the folder with a kind of reverence. It had held her story when no one else would. And now, it sat in the heart of a room once built for others. A knock interrupted her thoughts. A young staffer stood in the doorway, fresh-faced, nervous, holding a tablet too tightly. "Sorry to disturb, ma'am." "I mean, Miriam," he stammered. "Just wanted to say congratulations. People are really inspired. Actually, I was wondering." He hesitated, unsure if he should finish. She looked up, patient. "How did you do it?" he asked. "How did you make them see?" Miriam smiled, not broadly, not triumphantly. Just softly. "By letting the work speak," she said. No dramatic pause. No need for explanation. That one sentence held everything: her long nights, the missed recognition, the refusal to give up when others stopped looking. She had never raised her voice. She had never chased titles. She'd built, refined, proven. Quietly. Relentlessly. The staffer nodded, unsure if he understood entirely, but sensing the weight behind her words. He left with a thoughtful look, and she returned her gaze to the skyline. Below, the city moved with its usual rhythm, fast, loud, and different. It had no idea how many times she'd walked those streets, unnoticed. No idea how close it had come to losing what it never bothered to see. But that didn't matter anymore. Within these walls, her name no longer echoed as a whisper of doubt. It carried weight. It carried change. Some legacies are born loud, shouted into existence. Others unfold in silence, each step deliberate, each victory quiet but unshakable. Miriam's was the latter. She didn't need applause. The folder on her desk held the journey. The office around her reflected the destination. And somewhere between the two, she had become what no one thought possible. Unforgettable. Don't forget to hit that like button, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share this video. Thank you.